How does a brand built on silence end up at the center of the fashion conversation? For most of its history, Bottega Veneta stayed out of the spotlight. No logos, no noise, just craft and a quiet kind of confidence. And maybe that's exactly why what happened next felt so unexpected. Around 2018, something shifted. Bottega didn't just grow, it surged. The bags, the new direction, the color that suddenly appeared everywhere, it all landed at the same time, and the industry reacted instantly. People who had barely registered the brand before were now discussing it nonstop, and that rise didn't come without tension. As the attention grew, so did the questions. Anti-marketing became a strategy in itself. Absence made the brand even more visible, and a series of bold decisions pushed Bottega into territory it hadn't occupied before, bringing both excitement and controversy. So how did a brand built on understatement become one of the most debated names in modern fashion? And why did that rise come with so many questions? Long before Bottega Veneta became a name people argued about online, it was simply a small leather workshop in Vicenza. Founded in 1966 by Michele Taddei and Renzo Zenghiaro, the brand grew around one idea. When the product is good enough, you don't need to tell anyone. That mindset shaped everything, from the materials to the attitude. No logos, no bold signatures. Just leather, technique, and an internal confidence about what they were making. The intrecciato weave, which later became the house's calling card, wasn't created as a branding tool. It began as a practical solution. The sewing machines in the workshop couldn't handle thicker leather, so artisans wove the material to strengthen it. Over time, that weave became instantly recognizable to people who cared about craft. No logo needed. And Bottega leaned into that identity with the now famous line, "When your own initials are enough." Throughout the 80s and 90s, this quiet approach had earned the brand a loyal, discreet clientele. People who weren't chasing status symbols, but pieces that would last. But the industry around Bottega was evolving, and the pressure was hard to ignore. Luxury was becoming louder, more performative, and increasingly logo-driven. And somewhere in that shift, Bottega lost its own thread. Rather than holding its ground, the house began putting BV logos on its products, the opposite of everything it had been built on. It didn't work. The loyal clientele drifted, sales collapsed, and by the time the Gucci Group acquired the brand in 2001, Bottega was a house in serious decline, commercially struggling and culturally invisible. The turning point came when the brand joined the Gucci Group, now part of Kering. That acquisition opened the door for change, and in 2001, Thomas Meyer stepped in with a clear mission: rebuild the house without compromising its core. Meyer didn't reinvent Bottega, he clarified it. Clean silhouettes, exceptional leather, and a commitment to consistency over spectacle defined his tenure. Slowly, the brand regained stability and credibility. Fashion insiders trusted it again, and retailers followed. By the mid-2010s, Bottega had settled into a comfortable position, financially healthy, aesthetically coherent, and quietly respected. But it wasn't driving culture. It wasn't a conversation starter, and it wasn't the brand people were chasing. And that steady calm is exactly what made the next shift hit as hard as it did. Because when Daniel Lee stepped into Bottega Veneta in 2018, the brand wasn't in trouble. It was simply coasting. People respected it, the product was strong, and the identity was clear. But it wasn't a brand anyone talked about. It was familiar, predictable, and quietly sitting in the background, while other houses defined the moment. And maybe that's why Lee's appointment felt interesting. He wasn't a headline designer or a dramatic choice. He came from Celine, from a place where restraint and sharp editing mattered, and he brought that same mindset with him. Instead of trying to reinvent Bottega, he started by asking a simple question. What is already here that people stopped seeing? That's where the shift began. Lee tightened silhouettes, pushed proportions subtly, and treated the intrecciato not as a heritage symbol, but as a tool he could work with. The early collections didn't look like a break from the past. They looked like the past reconsidered. Familiar, but clearer. Traditional, but with a sense of direction. You could see the change most clearly in the pieces that started circulating behind the scenes. The pouch began appearing in showrooms long before it hit Instagram, and editors reacted immediately. Then came the cassette and the Jodi, both taking the Intrecciato and enlarging it just enough to feel new without feeling forced. None of these designs were chasing trends. The direction was clear, and it showed. As the collections developed, the visuals around them shifted too. That saturated green, which hadn't been introduced as a signature, kept showing up across the ready-to-wear, the accessories, and the stores. Slowly, it became part of the conversation. People recognized it before they even realized they were looking at Bottega. And because the work resonated, the response grew naturally. Retailers increased orders. Stylists used the pieces in shoots. Celebrities gravitated toward the shoes and bags without being pushed by the brand. Even without a heavy digital presence, Bottega was suddenly everywhere. Not because it demanded attention, but because the designs held it. What defined the period wasn't hype or shock value, but a sense of renewed purpose. The collections had a point of view again, and for the first time in years, Bottega wasn't just respected. It was relevant. But relevance brings visibility, and visibility brings pressure. And that pressure would eventually reshape everything that came next. As Bottega's momentum grew, something else started building alongside it, a sense of friction. The brand had always positioned itself away from spectacle, yet suddenly it was everywhere. Editors talked about it, buyers chased it, and social feeds filled up with padded sandals, oversized clutches, and that unmistakable green. For a house built on understatement, the new visibility felt almost contradictory. And that contradiction became part of the story. The turning point came in early 2021 when Bottega deleted all of its social media accounts without warning. No explanation, no replacement strategy, nothing. In an industry dependent on digital visibility, the decision looked almost defiant. Some called it genius, others called it pretentious. Either way, everyone had an opinion. Officially, the brand framed it as a choice to let the work speak for itself. But the timing raised questions. Bottega was reaching a level of cultural saturation it had never experienced before, and the pressure to maintain that presence was growing. By stepping back entirely, the house leaned into a form of anti-marketing that aligned with its heritage. But the irony was impossible to ignore. Leaving social media only made people talk about the brand more. At the same time, the collections themselves were becoming lightning rods for debate. Some consumers loved the exaggerated proportions and bold leatherwork. Others felt the shift was drifting too far from Bottega's original subtlety. The shoes in particular, the square-toe pumps, the quilted slides, became symbols of the divide. They were instantly recognizable, which made them commercially successful. But that recognizability also pushed Bottega into a spotlight the brand had never been designed for. Inside the industry, rumors began circulating about the intensity of the work environment and the strain of keeping up with the pace of success. Lee's tenure had transformed Bottega, but it had also created expectations that were difficult to sustain. The house wanted to remain discreet. The world wanted it to be omnipresent. And that tension, between quiet luxury and cultural dominance, eventually became unsustainable. The rise had been rapid, admired, and financially strong, but it came with a level of scrutiny Bottega hadn't faced in decades. The brand was now a regular subject of headlines, commentary, and speculation. So when news broke later in 2021 that Daniel Lee was leaving the company, it didn't feel like a surprising twist. It felt like the inevitable result of a period defined as much by growth as by pressure. And once again, Bottega was standing at a crossroads, this time with the world watching closely. When Daniel Lee's departure was announced in late 2021, the reaction wasn't dramatic so much as curious. The brand had been moving at an intense pace, and shifts like this often develop internally long before the public sees them. By the time the news became official, the real question wasn't why it happened. It was what Bottega would look like afterward. That answer came almost immediately. Matthieu Blazy, who had already been working within the studio, was appointed creative director. It wasn't a headline move, and that was exactly why it felt intentional. Blazy understood the house, the structure, the codes, the quieter temperament that had always defined Bottega before its sudden cultural explosion. From the beginning, it was clear he wasn't stepping in to extend the new Bottega era, but to recalibrate it. Bring the brand back to a place where craft led the conversation. His first collection made that shift unmistakable. Instead of chasing recognizable instant hit pieces, Blazy centered everything around construction and movement, clothes that looked simple until you got close enough to understand the work behind them. The now famous leather jeans, the fluid tailoring, the refined knitwear. Each piece carried a level of precision that didn't need theatrics. The work was precise and technically demanding, and it read as a deliberate return to what the house had been before the Lee era took over. Not everyone welcomed the shift. Some wanted another wave of immediately iconic bags. Others thought it was exactly what Bottega needed. Blazy wasn't trying to outdo Lee. He was doing something different entirely. And over the next seasons, that approach earned respect. Buyers responded to the clarity. Editors praised the coherence, and the collections looked like they belonged to a brand thinking beyond the next viral moment. Marketing shifted in the same direction. Lee's era had unintentionally turned Bottega into a cultural flashpoint. Blazy's felt more controlled. Imagery became calmer, communication more measured, and the brand positioned itself toward long-term identity rather than short-term impact. It didn't remove debate, but it reframed it. To some, the new direction felt grounded. To others, it signaled a loss of spark. In many ways, the divide echoed a larger luxury conversation. Should a modern house prioritize continuity or chase cultural momentum? Financially and strategically, Bottega remained strong. Under Blazy, ready-to-wear became a central pillar, proving that the brand could build beyond accessories. And as each season developed, Bottega seemed to find a steadier balance than it had in years. But fashion doesn't stay static. Even with renewed stability, the next challenge was already forming: how to evolve without losing the quiet authority that made Bottega distinctive in the first place. As Bottega moved through Matthieu Blazy's tenure, the conversation around the brand shifted from aesthetics to something larger: its place within today's luxury landscape. By 2024, Bottega had reached revenues of around 1.7 billion euros, making it one of Kering's most stable performers, even as the broader luxury market softened. Analysts repeatedly highlighted the house's resilience, noting the strength of its ready-to-wear and its unusually consistent full-price sell-through. But numbers weren't the only thing defining this period. As Bottega entered the Blazy era, the conversation moved beyond silhouettes to a deeper question. What does luxury actually represent for a house like this? Prices rose steadily, sometimes sharply, and while the craftsmanship supported that ambition, it also raised familiar debates. Bottega positioned itself as a brand for people who gravitated towards subtlety, yet the cost of that subtlety placed it firmly within the realm of the elite. It echoed the same tension seen with brands like the Row. The quieter the message, the louder the price tag began to feel. For some, that made sense. Bottega wasn't offering trend pieces. It was offering technique, longevity, and a point of view that didn't rely on logos. For others, the disconnect was harder to ignore. A woven leather bag costing several thousand euros served as a reminder that quiet luxury wasn't an escape from status culture. It was simply a different expression of it. You weren't paying for visibility. You were paying to participate in a particular conversation about taste. Blazy's collections, especially through 2023 and 2024, reinforced that dynamic. Tailoring grew sharper, knitwear more intricate, and both men's and women's ready-to-wear were widely considered some of Bottega's strongest work in years. But the stability of the direction didn't last indefinitely. In December 2024, Blazy exited the house. By then, it was clear he was ready for a different challenge, and the brand needed a new rhythm. His move to Chanel simply confirmed what many insiders already sensed. His trajectory and Bottega's weren't fully aligned anymore. Louise Trotter stepped in as the new creative director, inheriting a house with a steady foundation, but high expectations. Trotter also arrives as the only female creative director across all Kering-owned houses, and she does so just as Bottega prepares to mark its 60th anniversary in 2026, a milestone that makes the question of identity feel more urgent than ever. That transition reflects a broader shift across the industry. Heritage houses can't rely solely on archives, but chasing virality can erode identity just as quickly. Bottega's challenge, now under Trotter, is finding the balance, staying present without becoming performative, and evolving without compromising the quiet authority that once defined it. In the end, Bottega faces the same dilemma as every modern luxury house. How do you grow without losing the identity that made people care in the first place? So, I'm curious, do you think Bottega is on the right path? Or does the brand need another shift to stay competitive? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.